Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 16th, 2023. I'm going to focus on two interviews yesterday, which I think shed a lot of light on what has to be done to break the power of the unipolar order. That is, to take power away from the war hawks and neoliberals who are driving the world to the brink of not just World War III, but possible nuclear war. These two interviews offer profound insights into both the process that's underway from the oligarchy, but also how to fight it. And that is to get the truth out. The whole idea of these interviews is that we have the power if we use the truth, if we wield it. And the people who are supporting these wars have only one response, which is slander, lies, and censorship. Now, the basis for a durable peace, it rests with you. That is, the people who are watching this video, the people that you can contact, the mobilization you can do, because it's not going to come from the mainstream media, as we know. So let me begin with my weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, which I will link below in the description page. In it, she highlights this potential, and she is in a position to know this because she has, for many years recently, called for the replacement of the current paradigm of the so-called unipolar order or the rules-based order with a new strategic and economic development architecture, which is the only basis for a lasting peace. Now, for her efforts, she's been vilified in the mainstream press, or for the most part, ignored. But it's important that this interview get out, because what she said yesterday about the Hersh revelations is quite significant. So let me start with that. Here's what she said. Quote, "I think if anybody wants to stop the war, wants to throw a monkey wrench into the dynamic, then the idea that the whole thing has to be investigated, that is the Nord Stream pipeline's explosion, is one of the most important steps to possibly get to a diplomatic solution and stop the war drive. Because we are very, very close to World War III, and anything which stops that dynamic is super urgent," unquote. Now, she was talking about this in the context of the NATO foreign ministers, or defense ministers rather, meeting and planning out more war, global NATO, and so on. But also the fact that the Hersh story has a potential to break through the censorship and control of the narrative. And she said what he makes clear is that the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines was an act of war. And she said it exhibited the recklessness of the global NATO policy. And this is coming at a point where there are a series of anti-war mobilizations and demonstrations coming up, which are growing in size and, importantly, are including people from both the so-called left and the so-called right, which exposes the fraudulent division that's used to keep people apart, to divide them, the identity politics on the left and the tough war hawk and austerity policies on the so-called right. And what Helga said is, as we are on the days before the February 19th anti-war march and demo in Washington, D.C., and by the way, it's in many other cities as well, she said, quote, "We are approaching World War III rapidly, and therefore the demand to stop immediately and have negotiations, have a diplomatic solution, which is the main focus of these demonstrations, is becoming super urgent." So that's from Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Now, significantly, there was a major breakthrough in Germany in the media. This comes on the heels of Helga Zepp-LaRouche's interview with Kim.com. But this is the Berliner Zeitung, which is the largest paper in Berlin, did an interview with Seymour Hersh on February 14th. And I'm going to read you some of what he said because it's not covered yet in the US media, which is basically covering hacks for the oligarchy, who are saying Hersh is washed up, it's a single source, it's not reliable, he's over the hill. Dismissive bunk, which Hersh himself addresses. So what he was asked about the story that he told that on his website, on his Substack website, that the U.S. blew up the pipelines. And it's extremely detailed and documented and goes through a chronology as well as the method that was used to destroy the pipelines. Hersh said, quote, "It was the story I wanted to tell. At the end of September 2022, 8 bombs were to be blown up off the island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, and 6 of them exploded. And he said the 2 of them did not explode because they had been in the water for so long, but 6 of them did." Now, he was asked if he had the possibility, if there were a debate in the Bundestag, and there are moves to have a debate, parliamentarians insisting that this should be discussed, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche has put out a statement which we're circulating calling for a discussion in the Bundestag. Hersh was asked if you had the possibility to ask Chancellor Scholz, what would you ask him? And Hersh said, quote, "Did Joe Biden tell you about it? That is the plan to blow up the pipelines. Did he tell you at the time of your February 7th meeting at the White House why he was so confident that he could blow up the pipeline? We Americans did not have a plan worked out at the time, but we knew we had an opportunity to implement it." And what Hersh writes is that in June, under the cover of the Balt Ops 22, which is the Baltic Operation military exercises of NATO, that 8 bombs were attached with C4 explosives to the pipelines under the cover of the military exercise, and they weren't detonated right away because it would look too fishy if you had the Balt Ops exercise and then the explosion. So they waited until September when they were detonated by remote control. Now, Hersh was asked, how did he find a source? Because this is one of the stories. Who would talk about this? How did this story break out? And he said, quote, at some point, after the Russians invaded, and then when the operation was completed, the whole thing became increasingly repugnant to the people who were doing it. These were people who worked in top positions in the intelligence services and were well trained. They turned against the project. They thought it was crazy. A short time after the attack, after they had done what they were ordered to do, there was a lot of anger among those involved about the operation and rejection. That's one of the reasons why I learned so much, unquote. And he basically said a source came to him to give him the story. Now, one of the points Hersh is making is that most of the so-called sourcing that's gone on in the mainstream media is based on plants from the intelligence agencies. And also, they're now using other newspaper sources or reporters as sources, as opposed to actually getting inside and finding out what's going on, which is the method he's always used and which is what has made him such an authoritative source. So he said, he was asked if this part of the strategy was to force Germany to buy gas from the United States. And also, by the way, Norway, because Norway, as he pointed out, was involved in this, and Norway has sold an enormous amount of gas as a result of the cutoff of Russian gas. So Hersh said, when asked if this is a plan to weaken Germany, he said, "I don't think they thought it through thoroughly. I know that sounds strange. I don't think Secretary of State Blinken and some others in the government are deep thinkers." And he said there are certainly people in the U.S. Business community who thought this would make us more competitive. They can sell LNG to Europe at a very high profit and make a lot of money from it. And so he said, "I'm sure there were some people who thought, boy, this is going to give a long-term boost to the American economy. But in the White House," he said, "I think they were always obsessed with re-election. They wanted to win the war. They wanted to win a victory. They wanted Ukraine to somehow magically win." And he said there are also those who think it's better for our economy if the German economy is weak, but that's crazy, Hersh said. I think we got ourselves into something that is not going to work. The war is not going to end well for this government. And then he has the final point I want to bring to you where he says, what I do know is there's no way the war is going to end the way we want it to. And I don't know what we're going to do as we look further into the future. It scares me that the president was willing to do something like this. And the people who carried out this mission believed the president was aware of what he was doing to the people of Germany, that he was punishing them for a war that was not going well. And in the long run, this will not only damage his reputation as a president, it will be very damaging politically. It will be a stigma for the United States. Now, we have to take this as, I think, a reliable story about what happened and get this out. Use this in organizing for the February 19th demonstration and march. And then the next week, February 25th, there'll be demos in major European cities. These can be used to force the apologists for war to confront the danger that support for it implies. That is World War III and a nuclear war. And we have to expose the phony so-called progressives in the Democratic Party, like AOC, and the war hawks and the Republicans, who are both funded by the war machine and continue to push for more weapons and more war, even including the possibility of U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to add on the description section a link to a clip of another intervention done by our young colleague, Jose Vega. And it should be titled How to Intervene 101. And his point is, the point of what he's doing is get the facts, know the truth, and wield it as a weapon. We can't allow people to get away with this kind of insanity. The future of humanity depends on collapsing this unipolar order, which is collapsing on its own. And it's only going to be broken if you speak out boldly and bravely. Use the example of Jose Vega and do the same. Confront politicians everywhere and discuss this with everyone else who wants to try and avoid reality. The reality is that their future depends on breaking the power of this unipolar order. Now, tomorrow's Friday. I'll be taking your questions. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll see you then.